So here's the second of the 3 reviews that I'm shooting in tandem. Whether or not they will get released on the same day is another matter. It depends on how much editing I want to do. But let's get down with it. Today I'm reviewing a Canadian horror movie, a French-Canadian horror movie called 7 Days. So the film's directed by Daniel Grau, aka Pods apparently, and it stars Claude Legault, Remy Girard and Martin Debreuil. So the movie essentially tells the story of a couple whose daughter is kidnapped, raped and murdered. Their 8-year-old daughter. The police pretty quickly actually managed to find the man responsible. The trial is considered a formality. He's clearly guilty. The husband in the couple plots revenge, essentially. He gets hold of a cabin out somewhere in a secluded area of Quebec. Manages through fairly convoluted means to kidnap the paedophile that attacked his daughter, and takes him to this secluded cabin where he plans to torture him for 7 days. On the 7th day, which would have been his daughter's birthday, he plans to kill the man and then hand himself over to the police. The police and his wife begin to engage in a battle to try and get the man to surrender himself. Now this movie's got quite an interesting setup, because it looks at, you know, I've not even got any kids, let alone one that's been raped and killed, obviously. But I guess it kind of puts you in a situation that a lot of parents would kind of fantasize about, which is interesting. I guess the film's primary interest is kind of looking at the way people cope with grief, you know. Take a movie that deals with a similar concept in a very different way, Antichrist, the Lars von Trier movie, where a psychotherapist and his wife go to a secluded location to deal with the death of their son, and kind of the blame that they lay on their own door for not being good enough parents to prevent their child's death. You know, in a very similar sort of case, you know, the couple wanted to kind of get frisky, so that was the reason that they didn't accompany the daughter out on a walk to school or whatever. You know, which adds an interesting dimension to what's going on. And it kind of looks at that debate of what is justice and what isn't justice. You know, that's kind of one of the primary concerns of the film, and something that it puts across very well. It's not the most kind of translucent of themes. It's clearly there on the screen, and it kind of opens up that discussion within yourself, which is, you know, a very cool thing for the movie to do. Something that I do have kind of mixed opinions on in the movie is the lack of music. I mean, this movie has no music at all. Which is a double-edged sword in this case, because I mean, I get that they were trying to go for a sort of realism that non-diegetic elements kind of distract from. But at the same time, and I'm not going to spoil it, but later on in the film, there's an element introduced that kind of ruins that. You know, not so much a non-diegetic element, but a surreal element that kind of flies in the face of that realism a little bit, which kind of upsets the flow and you know, ruins that whole kind of atmosphere of realism that is built up by the lack of music. Ultimately, I feel like it's a good idea that's not seen through, so to speak. The whole scene that I'm talking about, if you've seen the movie, you'll know what I mean. I think that whole thing should have been dropped, because it would just be a better movie without it. I've got to say, the movie's torture scenes are very effective. The trouble is that they are kind of few and far between. With the first torture scene, you know, this isn't a major spoiler, but the first torture scene involves breaking the paedophile's knee, and then forcing him to walk around on it, which is quite a disturbing thing to witness in the film, actually. I've got to say, it did definitely put the frighteners on me a little bit. And given that it's a very kind of simple thing to do from an effects standpoint, it really does kind of hammer something home, which is quite an interesting sensation to experience. Yeah, that particular scene in the movie gets full marks from me. In terms of some of the later torture scenes though, they kind of veer over into that territory of being disgusting rather than disturbing. To be fair, plenty of movies do kind of tread that line very well. There are plenty of torture scenes in other movies that are both disgusting and disturbing. But oftentimes when directors are kind of going for disturbing, they end up at disgusting. And in a couple of the later scenes that is the case. I've got to say the movie's ending is somewhat anticlimactic. I'm not going to spoil it, but it really leaves it all as a bit of an open book, which is kind of a shame. I feel like this movie would be better served by a more kind of whole ending. And I've got to say this movie is a little bit too long. It could do have been trimmed down by a good 10 minutes or so. Like I say, the scene towards the end that I made reference to, that could go entirely, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that I feel like could go as well, to make this a slightly more streamlined film. Overall though, I do recommend 7 Days. It does have niggling problems, but I mean overall it's a solid movie that brings up some interesting ideas. If you're into your revenge movies, then this is a movie that you've really got to check out, because it does execute the whole revenge concept very well, for what it's worth. I'm going to give the film a score of 8 out of 10. I feel like there are certain things about this movie that hold it back slightly, such as a slight element of confusion about just what it's trying to portray through the issue of the music and the kind of diegetic imagery only that is kind of broken eventually. Yeah, plus the fact the film's a little bit overstuffed and kind of lingers on its themes a little bit, I guess. It does kind of, you know, it feels like there's very little that's sort of implicit in the film. Which is always a shame when you know, horror directors and writers have really great ideas, but they only kind of, you know, are on the surface. There's really, I don't feel like there's much kind of beyond the veil going on with this movie that you could kind of analyse. Although there's plenty on the surface that you could talk about till the cows come home, you know. So overall, this is an 8 out of 10 movie for me. It definitely gets a recommendation. I would suggest checking it out. It's definitely an interesting watch. Thanks very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you've enjoyed this review, why not subscribe, leave me a like and a comment. I'd really appreciate that. Also, I'd love for you to check out my podcast. It's linked in the description. It's called Ironcast. Please do go and check that out if you're interested. It's all about music. It's my pride and joy, really. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you very soon.